Hi, everybody, and we are live today with Matthew Braswell. Matthew, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And Matthew is a GS civilian, working logistics for a two-star command in the U.S. Army Reserves. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. I know we had a great conversation. I think it was last Friday with Angel Castro talking about the GG civilian side. So I'm excited to dive into a little bit of the GS civilian side. I know people have a lot of questions and everything else. But first, I guess, could you talk to us about like your path to your current role?
I'd be happy to. So I've actually been GS civilian, and specific to the Army Reserves, I'm actually what's known as a military technician, which means I have to be both a Army Reserve soldier, service member, as well as a civilian. I lose my status as a soldier. I lose my employment as a civilian. So I've actually been a term appointee, civilian appointee for 10 years now. And I first came into my position, I deployed to Iraq as a company grade officer. Was my first, actually, I was a signal officer at the time. I deployed as a signal officer, but as a battalion S4 or battalion logistics officer for a signal battalion. That was my first experience, basically, short of doing the equivalent perhaps of warehouse worker, inventory analyst type lower level roles. That was my first experience actually managing logistics. And I came back from that, and I was in the office doing redeployment activities, and the 06 G4 for the two-star command that I now work for walked by my office, and she backed up and she peeked her head in and said, "Who are you? What is it that you do here?" And the rest is history, as they say.
So I didn't understand that. That's pretty cool. So you said you're a military technician. So does that mean that you're still in the reserves?
It does.
That Monday to Friday, you wear that uniform that you're wearing right now, and then one weekend a month you wear the military uniform?
That is correct. Yes.
So what is your job when you're in uniform as opposed to what you're doing now?
So I am both a signal officer, as I was when I initially was initially commissioned, and I also branch transferred into logistics, which I think is part of what helped me get my civilian job. And so I've actually, for the last several years, I've been a fish out of water, so to speak, and I've been in an Army Reserve, what's now called a Seaburn Battalion.
Oh, wow.
Radiological and nuclear battalion. And I was actually mobilized active duty for almost 4 years with that organization as de facto deputy task force commander for a Homeland Response mission.
Cool.
Which was, was very exciting. A lot of great experience, leadership, like trial by fire 101.
So but right now, are you not still in that unit? Are you for your reserve time?
I am still in that unit for my reserve. Yes.
Okay, and so are you still doing that kind of a role right now, just for your drilling?
No, not that role specifically. That mission has transferred to another organization. I have actually taken a step back, and I've moved more into an advisory capacity now to, kind of prepare those to come behind me and pick up the flag, so to speak. So
yeah, awesome. So all right, so now so you still do your 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year in the summer, your traditional reserve time. But your day job as a military technician is in logistics for a two-star command.
That's correct.
So can you talk to me about like an overview of what that is?
Yes. So it really it varies a lot based on not every civilian logistician or logistics civilian that would come into the G4 of a 2-star command would necessarily be doing exactly what I do.
Right.
My leadership, thanks to them, it has made a lot of calculated decisions, informed decisions that I think employ talent appropriately based on skill sets. And so specific to me, I have a lot of skills and talents with regard to analysis, research, investigatory or investigative process, I suppose is the best way to say that. And so primarily what I do for my organization with the Army Reserves is I identify units or units are identified to me by my leadership that have whether it's a deployment or an exercise, or they need to go support another, maybe even active duty or National Guard unit. There's a requirement for a specific unit to do something that's identified to me. I then go through their equipment that they're authorized, the Army says they're supposed to have, and I match that. I do analysis against what they actually have.
Yep.
I figure out, all right, what they actually have, is that what they should have had? Is everything there that's supposed to be there?
Right.
If not, then that's a process you're probably familiar with that we have to go down and figure out what happened to it. The things that they don't have, they should have, I either get them connected with the folks to get it fielded by the Army, or I go out and I try and find it.
Right.
Dependent, and so there's a lot of conversations that go back and forth. There's a lot of, again, research and analysis that goes into what do you actually need to do or perform which specific requirements, what capabilities are needed, and what is the priority for those to be with you. And so lots of questions again. And so depending on how that fleshes out, I kind of get a schedule comes together, and I get real excited about, trying to help the unit kind of solve its equipment needs.
No, that's exciting. And I don't know if you know this, but I worked Army Audit Readiness for the last 2 years. So I know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to making sure they have exactly what they're supposed to have. If it's on the books, they should have it, right?
Yes.
And we all know about command inventories and everything else like that. One of the fun things I always looked at was, is everything that does everything they have exist on the books? That's a whole nother fun side of that. So, and I've been, honored to be a part of helping to fix that for the Army, to make your job a lot easier at some point, and commanders' jobs, knowing exactly what they have and what they can prioritize their expenses on. So that sounds exciting. So how many of these training events, exercises a year are you usually planning for?
So a good bit less than, what it would otherwise be right now because of the COVID-19 environment. And so the operational tempo has gone down quite a bit.
Right.
However, though, so exercises and that sort of thing much reduced, but deployments have still been, we've still got just as many of those scheduled, I think, as perhaps we ever have. And, I've got, I guess you might say, one organization on the ramp right now, and another in the parking lot. Those are appropriate terms.
Yeah.
So that's occupying a lot of my time, and that's on top of I have routine and regular reporting requirements, uh, monthly as well as weekly, where I have to maintain make sure that my senior leadership has a very consistent and constant awareness of where our ability to respond is and where our ability to prepare our units is in terms of equipment, again, that they should have. Is it actually on hand? And if it's not and they need it, what are we doing to get it?
So Mark has a good question. He says, how do you determine what they actually have? Are you doing layouts? Are you going out to the units? I thought that's a fun question.
It is. It is. And so that's a part of the process that I'm both there's an inventory process that I know you're familiar with, Mike, and Mark, you may or may not be. So every unit has inventory requirements. They have to, in the Army Reserve specifically, and this is all actually laid out in Army regulation. The Army Reserve specifically has to inventory 10% of its overall equipment every month, typically. Mm-hmm. Whether they do 10% specifically or not is, a little bit up to them and, what's going on. But the end result must be, and their command leadership must certify every year that they've inventoried 100% of it. No ifs, ands, or buts. And so there's also a process that once they've identified something is missing, that they have to go through to report it, to research it. Is it actually missing? Was it misplaced and it's just in the container over there, or in this box over here and it was just put somewhere else? So that there's a whole process involved with that. But some items, and especially in my, so I do communications for the Army Reserves. It's actually the largest communications organization for the Army Reserves, and we have over 80% of the Army Reserves communications assets in my two-star command. So we have a lot of equipment that requires it's serial numbered, and so it must be inventoried monthly.
Yep.
And some of it even has to be reported to the highest levels of the Army in terms of
sensitive items getting reported up. Yep. Got it.
Yeah. So for that stuff, there's the tolerance for variance is a lot less.
Yeah. So when something comes up missing, are you the investigating officer for some of that, or are you doing it at the command level and they appoint their own investigating officer for a report, a survey, or whatever?
So a little bit of both. In my Army Reserve capacity as a field grade officer, yes, I have done several investigations. In fact, it's been several years back now, but I actually did an investigation many years ago. I guess 4 years ago now, for the Army Reserve Command, where I found dozens of weapons that had been turned in for repair and replacement and sent off to rebuild. They were scattered all over the country. And I actually did that in my Army Reserve soldier capacity. As a civilian, though, I don't typically serve as an investigating officer, but because of my experience and my knowledge of Army regulations, I serve more in an advisory capacity. Mm-hmm. And in a review capacity for making sure that our organizations and the investigating officers that they appoint follow the processes and the procedures that have been laid out by the Army. And so there's a part of that that's very, very heavily legal in nature that falls in the realms of what we call the staff judge advocate. And then there's a part of that we call it with Army Regulation 710-2, and which is how we do supply in the Army. And then Army Regulation 735-5 is actually property accountability. And so a lot of that is very, again, legal in nature, but a lot of it is also very logistically process oriented. And so part of what I do is also advise our legal teammates about what makes the most sense logically and logistically.
Right.
So, getting back to like Latin and Greek roots, there's a whole lot of logos involved. And again, that ties in heavily with my skill sets and my talents where, I have investigating officers or even SJA officers who come to me and say, "Hey, Mr. Braswell, will you take a look at this? This is what the unit is saying that they did to try and find this equipment." And I can look through that, and in about 5 to 10 minutes, I can tell how thorough of a job they did actually looking for this stuff.
It sounds like there's a very strong correlation to your G4 type roles, or even like an S4 at the brigade level or higher. That's really, somebody that's got the military experience in the logistician realm, has been on the writing, running the reports of investigation or reports of survey, doing the investigations, running the inventories and everything else like that, to be able to make that transition kind of into what you do now. Like you have that somebody, if they have 20 years experience in the logistician area, they would be able to do a lot of what you do. Is that a fair estimate?
It absolutely is. Yes, Michael. And so when the Army Reserves, as I understand, first created the military technician program, and actually it's a U.S. code requirement by the Congress, actually by law, that a certain portion of civilians in the Army Reserves must also be military technicians. And as I understand it, again, that was initially done so that the civilians that came into the Army Reserves brought with them a certain degree of military experience and knowledge that the Army Reserves felt we would need in our jobs.
Right.
As we're the continuity, if you will, for the reserves, or probably all the reserve forces for that matter.
Right.
And so we would bring that military knowledge to bear in our civilian positions, and thus be that much more value, I think, to taxpayers and to really the nation.
Yep. I think it really lines up with the concept of really no cold starts, having you guys keeping everything together when the units aren't drilling enables the units to be able to stand up and be effective, be a lot more effective sooner, I guess. How many of those roles exist? Do you know what the percentage is, or I guess in your unit, how many of the military technician roles are there approximately? Obviously not exact numbers.
So, right. I would say it's probably right around 80 to 85%. Generally, you're going to have, so using GS civilian, trying to think what the word is that we could use, the GS civilian pay band, anything up to GS 11 typically. It's not probably all exclusive or inclusive, but typically up to GS 11-ish is going to be a military technician position. Typically GS 12 and above will be Department of the Army civilians or DACs.
Okay, that makes sense. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, how many, for somebody that wants to do what you do, how many of those jobs typically exist in a state or whatever?
Right. So that's so the Army Reserves in particular has about, let's say, right around 20 major subordinate commands.
Yeah.
Some of those are division level 1-star. Some of those are 2-star. I would say each one of those has a G4 staff, and typically, including in my organization here in Atlanta, Georgia, you're typically going to have anywhere from 3 to 4 military technician positions in any of those logistical staff sections.
Okay. So there's probably about 100 or more of those roles in the Army Reserve, similar to what you do, or at least working in the G4 type roles.
Correct. Yes. And just so I'm the only civilian in our department, if you will, our G4 that does what I do. But I have a coworker and a teammate that works with services, specific,
right,
primarily food service for the Army Reserves, for Army Reserve units and soldiers. I have another teammate who works on the financial side of logistics, and so. Again, because we provide that continuity Monday through Friday, carrying on, what our units need to do. We have someone typically that is either an expert or well-versed enough that if a soldier goes out, has to leave, deploys, whatever happens, somebody can pick up that flag, if you will, and run.
So if somebody wants to wants to work in the foreshop as a military technician at some point, step one, join the reserves, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Step two, find a vacancy in one of the G4s and network to see if they'd be willing to bring you on. Is that about right?
Yes, and again, from early on in our discussion, it's so often it's who you know. Sometimes the person that's just walking by you. In my case, it was a senior leader.
Yep.
We just never know.
Could somebody find a vacancy and then join the reserves to fill that vacancy?
So yes, they could actually.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I guess, I'm sorry, I'm so intrigued into how all this works. I didn't know this, not to the level of detail we discussed, but we haven't gotten into your day. So we know what you do. Is it pretty much typical 9 to 5, government civilian work? Start early, start later, flex hours, 9-day schedule, whatever. Like, how does that all work for you?
So up until I guess it was March or so of 2020, it was, especially for the Army Reserves and my organization in particular, it was, every day drive to the office. Typically, 7:30 or 8 or whatever to 4:35, whatever. But things have had to change a lot here over the last year, as they have for, I think, everybody everywhere. And so now there's a lot more flexibility to remote work and flex hours, so on and so forth. For me specifically, my job, again, there's a lot of routine reports involved. I'm involved very heavily with what's called for those that are familiar with the Army Command Unit Status Reports, or CUSR. I do all the logistical analysis on those for my 2-star command, reviewing, vetting, validating, compiling all the data, and actually making it digestible and pulling the so what out of it. And actually, really, at the brigade level, and certainly at the 1-star, 2-star level, anyone that would be looking to, I think, really take, whether it's a logistics department / G4 job, or even probably any of the general officer level civilian positions in the staff section, really pulling out, not, being experienced and talented and skilled enough to be able to go and get data, compile it, but then to synthesize it and to pull the so what out of that and deliver it to a leader in such a way that they're not having to flip through pages. They're not having to spend however long scanning it. They know exactly what they need to know right away. They know why they need to know it, and they need to know why it is that you're bringing it to them and what you've done. What, in my case, what I've done to try and go get this unit their equipment that they need to deploy in a year, 6 months maybe. So
do you? How much of your time is spent on, like Microsoft Teams sessions or calls or whatever a day?
A day. So for me in particular, probably not more than 30 minutes to an hour if you average it out.
Right.
So, and that's because of everything I just said about how much reporting I've got, and there's a whole lot of research and analysis that I'm doing in Army systems.
Yep. Are you building decks as well? Like, are you building like slide decks? Are you putting together briefings? Are you building you already said you're building reports that go up to your higher command and everything else like that. I'm assuming that takes up the rest of your time. Right.
So in my case, I spend a whole lot of time in spreadsheets, but yeah, well, right. Because so I'm adept at Microsoft with Microsoft Excel. So, and so like pivot tables, for example, are often very helpful, but sometimes, so pivot tables are really helpful when you have a whole lot of information and you're trying to synthesize it quickly. Sometimes the body of the data is not large enough to warrant a pivot table, and it's more, as to get to your point, it's more figuring out who needs to know this and why, and what is the recommendation that I'm going to build from this. Yep. Then yes, I'm taking that synthesizing that from the raw data in the spreadsheet, and I'm either putting it into a PowerPoint, or I'm calling my boss on the phone and saying, here's what you need to know, sir, to answer the general or whoever. And sometimes, my customers are our units.
Yep. Are you also going out and contracting for services? Are you involved in actual contracting, searching for vendors, taking proposals, source selection, stuff like that?
Not me specifically, no, but I do have a coworker who does that specifically for our department.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, it's 30 minutes. These half-hour sessions fly by. I wanted to turn it over to you to see if there is, like any advice for people looking to get into what you're doing, any tips for people when it comes to, networking. Give you the last word, basically.
Well, I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. And I appreciate your time today too. I would say number one would be to reach out to me for sure. If you're interested, if there's anything I can do to help you, if you have more questions. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. But really beyond that, I would say that even for someone who's not in the Army Reserves, there are Department of the Army civilian positions out there. In some cases, the positions that we have in the Army Reserves are moving more towards DAC. If you have prior civilian world experience, and if you have higher level degrees, education specific, in this case, to the field of logistics, and I'm talking like MBAs, even engineering degrees, what have you. And I did not have that coming in, but if you do, and you're coming out of the civilian world, that makes you that much more competitive for a GS job. And the same, from what I understand, goes for human resources or other fields. So
yep. The advanced degree and the experience helps for sure. But I think it all gets, like you said, a lot of it just still goes down to who you know, or more importantly, who knows you. So, well, Matthew, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening. I'm sure we'll be chatting again in the near future. I really appreciate you spending your time with us this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and tag you on the post. This will also be on our YouTube channel, and I'll add the link to that in the comments. And then I'll tell everybody there, please reach out to Matthew. He's very responsive. And if you have any questions whatsoever. So
thank you.
Thanks again, and have a great day.
You too. I hope everybody finds it of value.
Yeah, I'm sure I already did. So cool.